Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we are super happy to have you here, and we just ask that you bring an open mind and heart to your listening experience and to be prepared to explore vantage points that I'm convinced will help shift or solidify your current understanding of the ultimate nature of reality in a way that is extremely empowering. Speaking of exploring powerful perspectives, I'm super excited to announce the release of my very first book, The Golden Key: Modern Alchemy to Unlock Infinite Abundance. If you're ready to alchemize the circumstances in your life so that your abundance expands to an entirely new level in 2021, head over to goldenkey.gift to download the audio or ebook as my gift to you by using the code POSITIVEHEAD. All right, all you positive heads, welcome, welcome. Here we grow again. It is a fantabulous Friday here in the studio as I record, and I am coming back into the studio after spending a few days at Lightning in a Bottle Festival in Bakersfield, California, and it was the first really big transformational festival I've been to in years with COVID and us coming out of the COVID chrysalis, and it did not disappoint. Those of you who have been listening to the show for a while, probably some of you may remember. It goes back actually to episode number 2, where I share one of my magical stories from Lightning in a Bottle. Definitely one of the most powerful sort of channeling experiences that happened with me, for me, messages delivered. And if you guys want to go back and listen to that one, go to positivehead.com and you can search either on the podcast or youniverse page. Put in number 2 on the youniverse page. If you put in number 2, it will bring up that episode. So, and you can hear those old stories from, looks like March 23rd, 2015. I'm just pulling it up here. And so now here we are all these years later. LIB did not disappoint, bringing the magic yet again. And so, it's been a minute since I've recorded, and what better way to get back on the mic than to share stories of spiritual breadcrumbs, synchronicity, serendipity, just pure magic. Magic is real, and I hope you guys are inspired by these stories. So that's what I'm gonna get into today. I suppose I'll just jump right in. For those of you who go back and listen to episode number 2, you'll hear the original LIB magic story, like I mentioned, and that one was just super, super powerful and sort of a foreshadowing for me of things to come, and sort of I was being prepped, I feel, for some of the challenges that were right ahead. And so this time, there's actually 2 stories that I want to share with you guys. So one goes back to, actually has its origins maybe, I'm going to guess 2018. I went up to a festival in Northern California. It's so wild how much these transformational festivals create. My theory is that they create such a container of, thousands of people. I mean, LIB, I heard there was 37,000 people at it this year. So that's definitely on the much bigger end. But I went to a much smaller festival called Enchanted Forest, if I believe I'm remembering it the name correctly, which was probably 5,000 people or something, 2018, something like that. And there was a DJ performing. I may even have talked about this at some point on the show as well. I don't recall. But I had gotten into a very open, third eye, pride open, sort of psychedelic space, had taken some plant medicine, that opened me up, and I was really enjoying this particular DJ at this Enchanted Forest Festival years ago. And then I asked someone, like, wow, this guy's energy, his music, so good. I'm in such an open-hearted mind, energetic state. I asked someone who it was, and they told me his name, and I won't share it because, yeah, it's, well, I'll tell you, once you hear the story, you'll understand why I haven't really cleared it with this person or anything. So I think I'll keep their name out of it. But when I was told what the DJ's, first what his artist name was, then what his real name is, and his real name was actually one letter off, first and last name, one letter off from my grandfather. The exact same pronunciation, just slightly spelled different, first and last name. My grandfather who passed, when I was, 11 years old. And so as soon as I heard his name, and I was already kind of like tripping out on the power of the music, his energy, et cetera, I got just chills head to toe, like, oh my gosh, this person is deeply connected to my grandfather. Could this be the reincarnation of my grandfather? I don't know. And I would never say such a thing for sure, right? But I remembered reading a book by Sylvia Browne years earlier, the famous psychic who passed years ago as well. And she talked about how a lot of times, souls would even come back into the same family line. She believed that her granddaughter had been her grandmother, and that when her granddaughter was young, she would say things like, remember when I was big and I would carry you across the street to the grocery store here? And, now... And at that current time, there was no more grocery store. It had long been gone, right? And so, I remembered that, and, this idea that souls could come back. In this case, this person wasn't like in my direct family, but here I am in a small event and fully vibing out and experiencing his music. And it was, the feeling that I got more than anything in the moment I heard his name, right? So I went up to him the next day. I saw him on the festival grounds, and I was still kind of reeling from the night before. It was I find with transformational festivals, a lot of times it'll be like one night in particular will be the big night where just like magic, not always, but, in some cases, something super magical will happen. And so I went up to him, and I thought about the year my grandfather died, 1985. And so I went up to him, and I was in my head, my logic was, okay, well, give him some time on the other side, on the other side to regroup. So maybe 1986, I went up to this guy and I said, hey, saw your set last night. Curious, were you born in 1986? And he was like, well, of course, a little taken back, weird question just to walk up to a stranger and say. And by the way, even his look reminded me of pictures of him, my grandfather I'd seen when he was young, as well. And, my grandfather was actually in the Navy and was at Pearl Harbor when it got bombed, and he jumped ship and swam and survived. I mean, his ship is still at the bottom of the ocean there in the harbor, in Pearl Harbor. So lucky for me, he survived. But anyway, I even thought he kind of had a resemblance. And I was like, were you born in 1986? He goes, 1985, but how'd you guess, so closely? And then I kind of told him this, my experience the night before, how much intensity of my grandfather's energy came through, and told him a little bit about my grandfather. And he was like, yeah, doesn't particularly resonate, the like Pearl Harbor thing or whatever. And I think he probably thought this guy's a little weird, rightfully so. And that was it. He went about his day. I went about my day. And then I'd see him from time to time at festivals in the years since. And and a couple times I was like, hey, Grandpa, and he's like, who is this weird guy? And I was like, hey, remember I'm the guy who was tripping out that night, about my grandfather, and you have the same name, etc. And so now fast forward to this lightning in a bottle. I end up going... I have a friend that I met just 6 months ago or so, and he was putting together a camp at Lightning in a Bottle with like 30 people. He's the only person I knew in the camp, but new friend, liked him, thought, yeah, let's let me and my partner we'll camp with you. And so I camp with this person who, by the way, has the same name pretty much, slight difference as well. 2 letters off as my uncle, which, his dad was my grandfather, right? Who was like my hero as a kid. He's an entrepreneur, I thought he was like the coolest thing ever, my mom's brother. And so his name was Rick. This guy's name is Elric. So I'll go ahead and share that. And so, Elric, I ended up camping with him, and lo and behold, here's the DJ grandpa there as part of the camp. And so I'm like, oh, interesting. Here's a festival of 37,000 people, and I'm going to be camping with this guy now. So I get the chance to know him a little bit more on this trip. And, I remind him again, and he's like, now he's like, I get to know him. He's definitely a character, like very like comedic and, definitely a person I would hang out with and be friends with. And we got to be friends, right? And I imagine we're going to spend more time, and, it feels like the fates are bringing us together, right? And so here's the cool thing. As I get to know him, I'm like, then I find out he was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. Well, I'm from Virginia. I live in Los Angeles, right? But I grew up in Virginia, and I went to college in Nashville, Tennessee. My ex-business partner, who I talked about a bunch on the show, and sort of my hero's journey tale. I write about him in The Golden Key, my book. He just bought a home in Nashville. He grew up here in the LA area. I mean, it's like, so random energetic connections there. He's going to spend 6 months out of the year there. So lots of connections to Nashville, right? So I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. He grew up where I went to college. I have strong ties there. My ex-business partner just bought a home there randomly, quote unquote, coincidentally. And so then I realize I start telling him, a few days in, I'm like, and I'm just realizing you and I are here camping together because of Elric. Well, Rick is my hero growing up. That's my grandfather's son, my uncle, my mom's brother. So that's kind of interesting. Well, DJ guy, grandpa reincarnated, perhaps, looks at me and goes, well, Rick, that's my dad, my best friend. So his dad, the exact same name as my uncle, so he's the name of grandpa. His dad is the name of my uncle. It's kind of like reversed father and son, right? In that case. And I'm just like, get out of here. Wow. Okay. This is going deeper. So then I'm like, when were you born? I want to find out. I remember the day my grandfather passed, because I would spend weekends there and go to church with my grandmother. My grandfather didn't typically go, but I remember sitting in church that day, and it was one of my only really strong psychic premonitions that came true. I remember sitting in church, whatever day that was at the time, and saying, oh, what day is it? And it's kind of like, it's giving me chills now as I think about it, because this story makes it important that the day come up, right? But at the time, I didn't know that. I was 11 years old. I looked to see what the day was. I played out in church that, oh, today my grandfather's going to die. And he wasn't in the hospital or anything. I mean, his health hadn't been amazing, but he was, he was fine, and so it's not like he was, we expected him to pass that day. And, so a few hours later, he dropped dead of a heart attack. And, so anyway, I asked, the guy I'm camping with, hey, what day were you born? He's like, my birthday is May 10th, 1985. So I get home from my trip, call my mom on the ride. Hey, told her the whole story. What day did granddaddy die? March 10th. 1985, 2 months to the day before my grandfather passed. So it seems like, wow, so there's like a 2-month window there. So, it'd been way different if all of a sudden it had been like, one was born first and then he died later, or like a 2-month window, both on the 10th. So I don't know. You guys tell me, but I might have just hung out with the reincarnation of my grandfather, who is a great DJ. And like I said, I'm not going to share his name just because I didn't. This is kind of a interesting, weird, strange, magical story, and I didn't talk to him about it, and I don't want to start throwing his name out there. But yeah, maybe in the future I will. Next time I talk to him, I'll mention it to him and see how he feels about it. And then you guys can check out his music and everything. But that's story number one. Quite possibly not the strangest story from my LIB this year, which, yeah, what a trip. However, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that one for Monday's episode, because yeah, it's a good one. It's worth an entire episode sharing all the details. It's really, really, really something. However, for today's episode, what I would like to do as I kind of sign off here, share a recording of another story that's a pretty famous story of a kid named James. Since we were talking about my grandfather, World War II, he had over 100 pieces of evidence to help demonstrate that he was indeed a fighter pilot that went down in World War II. And he remembered, because of the trauma of the event, et cetera. So I'm going to share it's pretty short story here, recounting it, and then I'm just going to go ahead and leave you guys with this to ponder this story of James, and then I'm going to go into straight into a song from John Hopkins, who's one of the artists that I saw at LIB this year. This is a pretty chill track, really, really cool. He has a whole album, music for psychedelic therapy, that I recommend. Really great artist. This song is called Emerald and Stone. So we'll hear James's story, about 8 minutes or so, of his recalling of his life as a fighter pilot in World War II, and then it'll go straight into Emerald and Stone by John Hopkins. And I will be sharing some otherworldly magic, otherworldly story for you on Monday's episode. So stay tuned. Until then, journey well. Love you so much.
Plane on fire. These are the screams that came from little James's room and woke up Andrea and Bruce Leiniger almost every night. The parents seriously regretted their visit to the World War II museum with their 2-year-old, although they could not understand why the visit had such a strong influence on him. There was a huge hall full of fighter planes, but there were no scenes of violence, no pictures of disaster. Since the visit, the boy developed a serious interest in airplanes. At night, he began to struggle with nightmares more and more often. It was as if he was desperately trying to get out of some kind of an invisible shell that was squeezing him from all sides. He screamed heart-rendingly, "Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out." The Leinigers' family doctor was puzzled. Nightmares and night terrors are common for children, but usually this phase occurs at about 4 years old. James's nightmares began much earlier and recurred with frightening consistency. The doctor advised the parents not to panic. In case of a night terror, he advised them to take the boy into their arms, to speak with him quietly and gently in order to try and calm him down, as well as to ask him to give detailed descriptions or even draw pictures of his disturbing dreams. Even though James experienced more and more nightmares at night, during the day he gave the impression of being a generally happy and healthy child. This phase, however, lasted only for a limited time. Soon, the strange behaviors also started to occur during the day. One time, Andrea showed her son a model airplane in the window of a toy store and said that there was a bomb under the pilot's cabin. James responded confidently, "That's not a bomb, that's a drop tank." When he went on a trip with his parents, the boy amazed Bruce and Andrea by how professionally and confidently he observed the planes standing on the airfield. Bruce said proudly, "He's a genius." But Andrea was getting more and more worried. One night, James had a particularly bad attack. It took a long time for the boy to calm down in his mother's arms. Following the doctor's advice, Andrea asked him, "Who is the man that can't get out?" James replied, "Me." "What happened to your plane?" "It caught fire and fell." "Why did it fall?" "It was hit." "How?" "Who hit you?" asked Bruce. The boy looked at him with a puzzled look and said in a matter-of-fact way, "The Japanese, of course." Afterwards, he gave a detailed description of Japanese fighter planes during World War II. The boy signed his pictures with James III. Later, in a list of pilots who died on March 3, 1945, Bruce discovered the name James Houston Jr., James II. James's maternal grandmother was the first to have the courage to voice her opinion. Maybe the Leiniger family is facing a case of reincarnation. The parents were categorically opposed to this line of thought, and it even made Bruce seriously angry. As a Christian and a rational thinker who worked as a director of human resources at an oil company, he did not want to hear about what he considered to be stupid superstitions. He said that tales of a previous life offended rational thought. He did not give up on finding a rational explanation for his son's behavior. In order to achieve this, he began to ask the boy more detailed questions. "Do you remember the type of plane that the little man flew?" "Corsair," answered James without hesitation. Where did it take off from? A ship called the Natoma. Bruce began researching the internet and soon found out that an American aircraft carrier called the Natoma Bay was used to transport Corsair planes during the war. Intrigued by the coincidence of those two details, Bruce continued to have conversations with his son. Under the guise of a historian writing a book, Bruce Leiniger went to a meeting of the Natoma Bay veterans. It turned out that absolutely all details that he heard from his son were true. These included the names of technical flight elements, nicknames of combat aircrafts, and the location of their last battle in 1945, which the boy recognized in a picture. At that point, Andrea, too, was convinced that the soul of the slain fighter pilot chose their son to return to this world. Bruce, however, continued to fight against superstition. He was set on catching his son in a mistake in order to prove that the whole story of a fighter pilot was the product of the boy's imagination and coincidences that were amazing and unbelievable, but coincidences nevertheless. Do you know if the man from the plane had any friends? Yes, he had a friend named Jack Larson. The father was convinced that the mystery would be resolved when it would become clear that there was no Jack Larson, but that was not the case. Not only did Jack Larson exist and was a fighter pilot during World War II, but he was still alive. Bruce spared no time or money in locating the veteran. He went to him with a list of descriptions that his son gave to him about his service in the U.S. Air Force. Larson confirmed each and every detail. At that point, Bruce was ready to believe in any explanation. He studied his son's drawings for hours. In one picture, the boy clumsily drew a burning plane, which no longer surprised Bruce. However, what surprised him was the boy's signature, which read, "To Dad from James III." Why the third? There was no James Sr. or James Jr. in the Leiniger family. James Huston was a fighter pilot whose plane was hit in 1945. When Andrea took over the initiative, she turned to a psychotherapist named Carol Bowman, who was the author of a best-selling book on the manifestation of reincarnations in the behavior of children. Bowman investigated dozens of children who were suffering from painful memories of past lives. She told Bruce and Andrea that their son was not unique and that such vivid manifestations of reincarnation usually occur in instances of violent deaths. Her take on the situation was that the soul was so saturated with past trauma that it couldn't rid itself of it even as it entered into the other world. This explanation no longer seemed strange to Bruce and Andrea. The psychotherapist advised for the parents to speak to the pilot directly when they were comforting their son because the pilot still lived within the boy. They should ask James to recall his nightmares as if they were actual memories, not dreams. The boy's night terrors really did become less severe. The boy woke up screaming and crying less frequently, while Bruce continued to study the history of the Natoma Bay and the list of slain pilots. One day, the final piece of the incredible puzzle was found. On a list of pilots who were hit on March 3, 1945, was the name of James Huston Jr. In parentheses, it said, James II. If all of this was true, it made sense that little James thought of himself as James III. In 2004, when James Leiniger was 6 years old, his story was featured on the front pages of major newspapers and gathered a huge audience on primetime on ABC. One of the most fascinating scenes was the Leinigers' family visit to Anne Barron, the sister of the late James Huston Jr. With difficulty to find the right words and tears in her eyes, she confirmed that the boy told her a lot of things that were known only to her and her brother, who passed away a long time ago. Anne Barron questioned how it is possible not to believe in other worlds and reincarnation after a story like this. Members of the Skeptics Society, which actively fights against mysticism and the occult, took it upon themselves to refute the story of James Leiniger. They said that Bruce and Andrea more or less consciously created a family saga in order to rid themselves of feelings of guilt associated with their son's nightmares that were brought on by their visit to the military museum, and also to attract attention to themselves. It is worth saying, however, that their rational arguments did not sound too convincing this time around. Carol Bowman, on the other hand, explained that memories from past lives are like regular memories. Events, places, and objects can force images or sensations from the past to re-emerge. This is what happened at the museum. Contact with familiar objects is even a part of a Buddhist ceremony, the purpose of which is to recognize reincarnated lamas. The claims of the family saga built on coincidences would have been more convincing if they were talking about a few words said by a child accidentally. But in James's case, we're talking about over 100 pieces of evidence, the truth of which was confirmed by careful verification. Today, James is a 17-year-old who leads the life of a typical young man. He is no longer troubled by nightmares. Memories from his past life stopped appearing to him ever since he and his parents went to say goodbye to the deceased pilot. He said a prayer and dropped a bouquet of flowers in the ocean off the coast of Japan, where 75 years ago on March 3, 1945, the plane of James Huston Jr. caught fire and crashed.
Also, before we cue up today's song, as a quick reminder, don't forget to download the Golden Key audio or ebook as my free gift to you at goldenkey.gift using the Golden Key code POSITIVEHEAD. And please, if you enjoy my gift, leave a positive review on Amazon so others can unlock their lives with the help of the Golden Key as well.